Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, President, Founder of AgileDad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand Up. So, without any further ado, let's get started. So, today I wanted to talk to you about something that someone sent in to me, and I'm glad they did. Now, this article is interesting because this is an article that was written by Neil Killick. And this article is pointing out an article that was written by Mike Cohn. So I'm reviewing an article that was written about an article. And I think it's interesting because I love his take on it, because I think his take on it, Neil's take on it, it really draws light into what Mike's take on it is. And this is one of those times where I don't want it to be my take on his take on his take. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from this article almost as if it's verbatim. And then we're going to talk about it openly. And as I go, I might pause and talk, that kind of thing. So here we go. So this is in the words of Neil. He says, I came across this post by prominent Agile expert Mike Cohn. Mike and I are dear friends, in case you didn't know that. Mike is an extremely knowledgeable practitioner, agreed, and consultant with massive wealth of experience, agreed again. And as such, he is someone we should most certainly listen to, from whom we can learn a great deal. I certainly don't disagree with that. However, I would like to address something in this particular post, a mistruth, which I think perpetuates a fundamental misunderstanding in our industry of what planning is and should be, particularly in the arena of agile software development and product development. Okay. The mistruth that he's talking about is that planning equates to looking forward a handful of sprints and making a prediction of what would be delivered by then. He goes on to say this is not what planning is about, or at least it's certainly not the primary purpose of planning. Ooh, let me pause there for a minute. I can tell already by the way this article slanted that I'm probably going to agree with Mike. And it's not because we're good friends, and it's not because he's the industry standard expert. Well, he is. But I think I'm going to agree with him because I do feel like planning equates to looking forward for a handful of sprints and trying to be predictable about what we can deliver and setting proper sprint goals. Interesting how this ties into yesterday's podcast. Nonetheless, let's continue. So he starts off with the Wikipedia definition of planning here. He says, planning is a process of thinking about the activities required to achieve a desired goal. It is the first and foremost activity to achieve desired results. It involves the creation and maintenance of a plan, such as a psychological aspect that will require conceptual skill. Okay. It says, as this definition correctly describes, planning is the act of figuring out what we need to do to meet an objective, not how much we can get done. Okay, let's stop there for a second. Respectfully, I have worked with many, many executives. I've been one of those executives. And I can honestly tell you, when they ask you, when will this be done? That's not, or when they ask you, how long is this going to take? I guess is a better question. They're not really asking how long it's going to take. They want to know when it's going to be done. So I think the misconception is that people are always asking for time. How much can we get done? And that's not necessarily what they're asking. But I think that when you take away the ability to forecast how much you can do, it is taking away a huge part of what executives like about agility. So let's continue and see where he takes this. Any prediction we want to take from planning activity is a byproduct, not the reason we do the primary artifact. If we reduce planning to figure out how many story points we can accomplish by a deadline, this line of reasoning is like saying it'll be a 5-hour drive equates to planning a road trip. But this is absolutely not the case. Which car should we use? What do we need to take with us? Which roads will we drive on? Where do we need to turn off? What is the best time to leave? Where should we stop for gas? Answering these questions about our options and which ones to choose to determine the best way forward is what planning is really about. Okay. I will stop right here and tell you I agree with Mike. Here we go. So I think sometimes when you get the team involved, at least initially, in trying to figure out how much work they can consume by a certain amount of time and that aspect of predictability, we get so lost in the weeds. If I say, how big is this wall? And someone says, well, that depends whether we're measuring it using a yardstick or a ruler. And it depends on da, 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 da. You know, I don't care what car you're using. right? I don't really care what you need to take with you. Everybody's going to take something different with them to be comfortable. Everyone's going to come to the table with different skill sets, with different tools, with different levels of experience. All these other questions that you just rattled off are almost completely irrelevant when it comes to figuring out forecasting or predictability. So this is one where I'm properly siding with Mike. I could probably stop reading the article now, but for the sake of doing so, I'm going to continue. Proper planning done frequently, as it is in Scrum and other Agile methods, is so critical, especially when employing an incremental or iterative way of working. But it seems folks are still being told to predict things as the focus of their planning activity rather than to actually plan how to do the work to meet the objective. Newsflash. Planning how you're going to execute happens at sprint planning. And this is when the team is actually going through and saying, this is the work that needs to be done. I'm going to do this work. So I think we're confusing, or you're pushing too much planning together. One of the strongest failing points I see is when you try to push too much towards that sprint planning meeting and try to establish what the work is, how we're going to do it, in the whole 9 yards during a sprint planning meeting, in addition to trying to achieve an objective or sprint goal. Forget about that. I think that when you pile this in and push too much to the end, that you're taking away the team's ability to be able to forecast and be predictable. So what I'm trying to say is you need to spread this out a little bit. It sounds like to me this is symptomatic of not having a proper release plan or not doing proper backlog grooming or refinement. I think that if you're doing these things, then the approach that we can push some things to the end and be predictable up front is a good approach. But if you're trying to do it all or nothing, then yeah, I see where your frustration is, but it's still not the right way to do it. Planning is what we will do and what we'll achieve, not how much we'll do. I disagree. I think planning is what we'll do and how much of what we'll do, because I think it's important to figure out, how much we can get done, because we need to at some point become predictable. And I think that this is something where, we drop the ball a lot. And he goes on to say, as such, release planning is not deciding how many cards or stories or points we can deliver by an arbitrary deadline. It's deciding what the focus of the release will be. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that you're pushing the meetings down one level here, my friend. So I think that vision and strategy is where we plan for high level what we're trying to do. Road mapping is where we identify our epics that are going to be done, and then we break our features down, and we take those features and break them into stories. And these things happen at backlog item creation and backlog refinement. And by the time we get to release planning, this is where we're planning out how much work we can fit. That's the whole purpose of release planning, how much work we can fit. And then as we do continued refinement to define acceptance criteria and learn more about the product or service offering, that's when we get closer to sprint planning and we can get to the point where we're working things out. So interesting, because I think that so here's the point where you are correct. Planning and predicting are two different things. However, I will go as far as to say that I think, based on what you have here, that prediction is the right focus, not the wrong focus. So I hope you enjoyed this. As always, we encourage you to tune in to AgileDad.com, where you can learn more about this topic and others. And Mike, it's always a pleasure to say you're right again. Stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.